The sun dipped low over the quiet suburban neighborhood of Willow Creek, casting long shadows across manicured lawns and cookie-cutter houses. I sat on my porch, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug, the weight of my past life as a SWAT sniper tucked away like the well-oiled shotguns in my safe. Retirement suited me, mostly. After 2 decades of high-stakes operations, I traded adrenaline for the hum of predictable routine. Morning runs, tinkering in my garage, and the occasional chat with nosy neighbors. But Willow Creek had a way of stirring up trouble, and tonight, trouble came knocking. It started with the crunch of gravel in my driveway. 2 men in crisp navy blue uniforms stepped out of a sleek black SUV, their badges glinting under the streetlights. They carried themselves with an air of authority, but something was off. Their patches read Willow Creek HOA Security, a title I'd never heard in my 3 years living here. The HOA was a pain, sure, always nitpicking about lawn heights or mailbox colors, but armed security? That was new. Mr. Callahan? The tall one called out, his voice clipped and overly formal. He had a square jaw and eyes that darted too much for my liking. His partner, shorter and stockier, clutched a clipboard like it was a shield. "That's me," I said, setting my coffee down and standing up slowly. At 6 feet 3 inches, with frame still hardened from years of training, I knew I didn't look like someone to mess with, but these guys didn't flinch. Not yet. We were the HOA's new compliance unit, the tall one said, flashing a badge that looked like it came from a costume shop. "We receive reports of unregistered firearms on your property. Per the updated covenants, all weapons must be cataloged and approved. We're here to inspect and, if necessary, confiscate." I raised an eyebrow. "Confiscate? Since when does the HOA play ATF?" The shorter one piped up, his voice a touch too eager. "New bylaws, sir. Safety concerns. You'll need to hand over any shotguns, rifles, or handguns for review." I leaned against the porch railing, letting the silence stretch. My gut screamed scam. The HOA was a bunch of busybodies, not a paramilitary outfit. And the way these two moved, too stiff, too rehearsed, set off every alarm bell I'd honed in my SWAT days. I'd seen enough con artists to know one when they stood on my doorstep. "Let me get this straight," I said, crossing my arms. "You're telling me the HOA, which fined me last month for a slightly faded porch light, now has the authority to seize my property? You got a warrant." The tall one's jaw tightened. "We don't need a warrant. HOA regulations supersede." "Supersede nothing." I cut in. "Show me the paperwork." The shorter one fumbled with his clipboard, producing a document that looked like it was printed off a budget inkjet. I scanned it. Vague legalese, no signatures, no official letterhead. My instincts were right. These guys weren't HOA. They were imposters, likely after my guns or something worse. "Stay here," I said, turning toward the door. "I'll grab my copy of the HOA charter." "Don't make this difficult, Mr. Callahan," the tall one said, his hand drifting toward his hip. No gun visible, but the gesture was enough to make my blood hum. Old habits die hard. Inside, I didn't head for charter. Instead, I opened my safe, pulling out my old service radio, still tuned to a secure channel I hadn't used in years. I keyed it up, hoping an old buddy at the precinct was listening. "Dispatch," this is Callahan. "Got 2 suspicious individuals claiming HOA authority at my residence. Requesting verification and backup." A crackle, then a faint reply. Someone was on it. Back on the porch, the 2 men were whispering heatedly. The tall one noticed me first. "Where's the charter?" "Right here," I said, patting my pocket, but keeping my eyes locked on them. "Before we go further, how about you tell me who authorized this little visit? Names, dates, details." The shorter one glanced at his partner, sweat beading on his forehead. "That's classified HOA business." I laughed, sharp and cold. "Classified? You're not the CIA. Try again." The tall one stepped forward, his patience fraying. "Look, Callahan, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Open the safe or we'll escalate." That's when I saw it. The faint outline of a holster under his jacket. Not a standard issue. These guys weren't just scammers. They were armed and bold. My mind raced through scenarios: disarm, de-escalate, or stall until backup arrived. I chose the latter. Escalate how? I asked, leaning forward just enough to make them feel the pressure. You think you can waltz into a retired SWAT sniper's house and throw around threats? You don't even know who you're dealing with. The tall one froze, his eyes narrowing. Retired, what? I let the words hang, watching their confidence crack. 20 years, Metro SWAT, Sniper Division. I've taken down guys a lot scarier than you two clowns. So let's try this again. Who sent you? The shorter one's clipboard slipped from his hands, clattering on the porch. The tall one tried to recover, but his voice shook. We're just doing our job, man. No need to. Job's over, I said, stepping closer. You got 10 seconds to get back in your fake cop car and drive away before I make a call that ends with you in cuffs. They exchanged a look, and I knew I had them. But before they could bolt, headlights swept across the driveway. A patrol car, lights off but moving fast. My radio call had worked. The two men froze, then scrambled for their SUV. But the cruiser cut them off, two officers stepping out with hands on their holsters. Evening, folks. One of the officers called, a guy I recognized from my old unit. Mind explaining why you're impersonating HOA security? The tall one stammered, but the shorter one broke, spilling a half-baked story about a misunderstanding. I watched as they were cuffed, my heart still pounding from the adrenaline. The officers found fake badges, a forged HOA letter, and in the SUV's trunk, a stash of zip ties and duct tape that made my skin crawl. These weren't just con artists, they were planning something darker. As the patrol car hauled them away, my old buddy clapped me on the shoulder. Still sharp, Callahan. You good? Yeah, I said, but my eyes were on the SUV's taillights. This wasn't over. Scammers don't come armed and organized without a bigger plan. Someone sent them, and I intended to find out who. The next morning, I dug into the HOA's records, calling in favors from old contacts. The real HOA had no compliance unit, no new bylaws about firearms. But the deeper I looked, the more I found. Complaints from other neighbors about strange visits, missing property, even threats. Someone was using the HOA as a front, and my little encounter was just the tip of the iceberg. I sat back in my chair, staring at the shotgun still safe in my closet. Retirement was supposed to be quiet, but Willow Creek had other plans. And if whoever was behind this thought they could outsmart a retired SWAT sniper, they were in for a rude awakening. The morning after the fake HOA officers tried to strong-arm their way into my house, Willow Creek felt different. The usual hum of sprinklers and dog walkers seemed muted, like the neighborhood was holding its breath. I stood in my garage, cleaning my old service rifle, not because I planned to use it, but because a familiar ritual kept my head clear. My years as a SWAT sniper taught me one thing: trouble never comes alone. Those two goons in fake uniforms were just the opening act, and I wasn't about to sit around waiting for the encore. By noon, I'd already made calls to half a dozen old contacts. Cops, private investigators, even a hacker buddy who owed me a favor from a bus gone right back in '09. The HOA's official records were clean, too clean, like someone had scrubbed them to hide a trail. But my hacker friend Jimmy came through with something better. An encrypted email chain he'd pulled from a server tied to the HOA's management company. It mentioned asset recovery and targeted residences, with my address flagged in bold. Someone was orchestrating this, and they weren't just after my shotguns. They were after something bigger. I decided to start with the neighbors. If this was a pattern, someone else had to have seen something. I grabbed a notepad and headed to Mrs. Delaney's place across the street. She was a retired schoolteacher, nosy in the best way, always watching the street like it was her personal soap opera. If anyone had dirt, it was her. "Tom Callahan, you look like you're on a mission," she said, peering over her glasses as she watered her roses. "Heard about the ruckus at your place last night. Everything okay?" "Not exactly," I said, keeping my tone light. "You ever see anyone claiming to be HOA security around here? Maybe asking about valuables, poking around?" Her eyes narrowed, and she set the watering can down. "Funny you mentioned that. Last week, two men in uniforms like the ones you described stopped by. Said they were doing a safety audit. Wanted to know if I had a security system where I kept my jewelry. I told them to buzz off, but they were pushy. Gave me the creeps. Did they leave a name? A card? I asked, pen ready. No card, but the tall one called himself Officer Grant. Said they'd be back if I didn't comply with some new rule about community asset registration. Sounded like nonsense to me. Grant. The name didn't ring a bell, but it was a start. I thanked her and moved on, hitting up 3 more houses on the block. The stories were eerily similar. Fake officers, vague threats, questions about valuables. One neighbor, a single mom named Carla, said they'd even asked about her late husband's coin collection, something she'd never mentioned to anyone in the HOA. These guys weren't just scammers. They were casing the neighborhood, building a hit list. Back home, I spread my notes across the kitchen table, piecing together a timeline. The visit started 2 months ago, right after the HOA hired a new management company, Pinnacle Properties. A quick search turned up nothing but a generic website and a P.O. box in Delaware. Shady, but not enough to go on. That's when Jimmy called back. "Yo, Callahan," he said, his voice crackling through my ancient flip phone. "That email chain? Traced it to a shell company tied to Pinnacle. They're linked to a guy named Victor Hess. Small-time crook with a rap sheet for fraud and extortion. Word is he's moved up in the world, running scams under legit-looking fronts. You want me to keep digging?" "Keep digging," I said, "and send me everything you got on Hess." By evening, Jimmy's dossier arrived digital, of course, since the guy hadn't touched paper since Y2K. Victor Hess was a piece of work. A former real estate hustler who'd done time for forging deeds, now suspected of running a network of fake security teams to shake down homeowners. The MO fit perfectly. Impersonate authority, scare people into compliance, and walk away with anything valuable. My shotguns were probably just a bonus. Hess's crew likely thought I was an easy mark, a retired guy living alone. Big mistake. I wasn't about to wait for Hess to make the next move. I drove to the HOA's community center, a squat building with too many potted plants and a bulletin board plastered with rules about pool hours. The office manager, a nervous guy named Greg, nearly jumped when I walked in. "Mr. Callahan." What brings you here?" he stammered, pushing up his glasses. "Tell me about Pinnacle Properties," I said, leaning on the counter. "When did you hire them? Who vetted them?" Greg's face went pale. "Pinnacle? They, came highly recommended. Took over in March. Streamlined our operations, saved us thousands." "Who recommended them?" I pressed. He hesitated, then mumbled something about a board member, Clara Vance. I knew Clara. Pushy, always angling for control of the HOA. If anyone was in on this, it was her. I thanked Greg and left, my mind already mapping out the next step, a chat with Clara. But as I stepped into the parking lot, my phone buzzed with text from Jimmy. "Hess's crew spotted in Willow Creek. Black van, no plates. Watch your back." I scanned the lot. Sure enough, a black van idled at the far end. Tinted windows hiding whoever was inside. My pulse kicked up, that old SWAT instinct flaring. I didn't have my rifle, but I had my wits and a concealed carry permit that hadn't expired. I slipped behind a row of cars, keeping low, and watched as the van's door slid open. 2 figures stepped out, not in fake HOA uniforms this time, but in dark jackets and gloves. Professionals. They weren't here for a friendly chat, and I wasn't about to let them get the drop on me. The parking lot of the Willow Creek Community Center was quiet, save for the low hum of the black van's engine. The 2 figures in dark jackets moved with purpose, their steps measured like predators stalking a trail. I crouched behind a pickup truck, my heart steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. 20 years as a SWAT sniper had taught me to read situations like this. These guys weren't here to talk. They were here to clean up a mess. I patted my side, feeling the reassuring weight of my concealed Glock. No need for it yet, though. My edge was in outthinking them, not outgunning them. The community center's lot was poorly lit, with plenty of shadows to use to my advantage. I slipped toward a cluster of shrubs, keeping the van in my peripheral vision. The taller of the two figures pulled something from his jacket. A handheld radio, crackling with static. I strained to catch the words. "Target's vehicle is here," he muttered. "No visual. Check the building." Target. That word sent a chill down my spine, but it also sharpened my focus. They knew my truck, which meant they'd been watching me longer than I'd realized. I needed to get ahead of this, and fast. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Jimmy again. I risked a glance at the screen. Hess's crew tied to a warehouse on 5th. Possible staging ground. Be careful, man. A warehouse. That gave me something to work with. But first, I had to deal with the immediate threat. The second figure, shorter and wirier, was circling toward the community center's entrance, while the tall one stayed near the van, scanning the lot. Divide and conquer, classic mistake. I moved silently, sticking to the shadows, until I was behind the van. The driver's side door was cracked open, and the keys were still in the ignition. Sloppy. I eased the door open, slid inside, and pulled the keys out, pocketing them. The van was a treasure trove. A laptop on the passenger seat, a stack of forged HOA documents, and a map of Willow Creek with several houses marked, mine included. I snapped photos of my phone, then slipped out before the tall guy noticed. My next move was to neutralize the wiry one before they regrouped. The community center's back door was unlocked. Greg's laziness was my luck. I slipped inside, moving through the dimly lit hallway toward the main office. The wiry guy was already there, rifling through files on Greg's desk. He didn't hear me approach until my shadow fell across him. He spun around, reaching for his waist, but I was faster, pinning his arm against the desk with one hand and pressing my other forearm against his throat. "Talk," I said, my voice low. "Who's Hess working for and why my house?" His eyes bulged, but he didn't answer. Instead, he tried to twist free, a move I'd seen 100 times in training. I tightened my grip, just enough to make him rethink his choices. "I'm a retired SWAT sniper," I said. "You really want to test me?" He froze, then rasped, "I don't know much, man. Hess hired me for muscle. Said we were hitting houses with high-value stuff. Yours was on the list, guns, maybe more. That's all I got." "List from who?" I pressed. "Some lady in the HOA. Clara something. She's feeding Hess intel." Clara Vance. I'd suspected her, but hearing it confirmed lit a fire in my gut. I zip-tied the guy's hands with a tie I found in his own pocket. Ironic, and left him slumped in the chair. One down, one to go. I crept back toward the lot, but the tall guy was gone. The van's door was still open, though, and the laptop was missing. He'd figured out I'd been there. My truck was still in the lot, but I wasn't about to make myself an easy target. I circled around to a neighbor's driveway, borrowing the shadows of their overgrown hedges. Sure enough, the tall guy was crouched near my truck, the laptop under his arm, talking into his radio. "He's here somewhere. Get the crew to the warehouse. We'll deal with him there." Warehouse. There it was again. I needed to get there before they could regroup, but first, I had to make sure this guy didn't follow me. I picked up a small rock and tossed it toward the far end of the lot, where it clattered against a trash can. The tall guy's head snapped toward the sound, and he took off in that direction, giving me just enough time to sprint to my truck and peel out. As I drove, I called Jimmy. "Got a location on that warehouse?" "Corner of 5th and Maple," he said. "Old industrial park. Looks abandoned, but Hess's crew's been using it. I'm pulling more data now. Call you back." The industrial park was a 20-minute drive, but I made it in 15, my mind racing through what I'd find. Clara Vance was the key. She was feeding Hess information, but why? Money? Power? Or something bigger? The warehouse loomed ahead, a rusted hulk surrounded by chain-link fencing. Lights flickered inside, and I spotted the black van parked near a loading dock. They'd beaten me here. I parked a block away, grabbing my old SWAT gear from the trunk. Night vision goggles, a tactical flashlight, and my Glock. I wasn't looking for a fight, but I wasn't walking in blind either. The fence had a gap just wide enough to slip through, and I moved toward the warehouse, sticking to the shadows. Voices echoed from inside, urgent and angry. I crouched near a broken window, catching snippets of conversation. "Callahan's on to us." A voice said, "Hess, I assumed. Clara says he's been asking questions. We need to move the goods tonight." Goods. Not just guns, then. This was bigger than a neighborhood scam. I edged closer, peering through the window. Crates lined the walls, some marked with symbols I recognized from my SWAT days, smuggling codes. This wasn't just about robbing houses. Hess was running a full-scale operation, and Willow Creek was his cover. I needed to get inside, get proof, and get out before they spotted me. But as I reached for the window latch, a hand clamped down on my shoulder. The hand on my shoulder was heavy, but my training kicked in before panic could. I spun, twisting the wrist and dropping low, my Glock drawn in a heartbeat. The figure grunted, stumbling back, a man in a dark jacket, not one of the two from the community center, but definitely part of Hess's crew. His radio crackled, giving away his intent to call for backup, but I was faster. A quick jab to his solar plexus sent him gasping to the ground, and I zip-tied his hands with the ties from his own pocket. Old SWAT habits die hard. "Stay quiet," I whispered, dragging him into the shadows. The warehouse loomed ahead, its flickering lights casting eerie patterns on the rusted walls. Inside, Victor Hess's voice carried, barking orders about moving the goods and dealing with Callahan. My name on his lips sent a surge of adrenaline through me. This wasn't just about my shotguns anymore, it was personal. I slipped through the broken window, landing softly on the concrete floor. The warehouse was a maze of crates and pallets, some labeled with cryptic symbols I'd seen in my SWAT days. Smuggling codes for high-value contraband, electronics, rare coins, even artwork. Hess's crew wasn't just scamming homeowners. They were running a black market operation, using Willow Creek's HOA as a front to scout targets. Clara Vance, the HOA board member, was their insider, feeding them intel on who had what. I moved silently, my night vision goggles painting the world in green. Hess stood near a loading dock, surrounded by 4 others, including the tall guy from the community center. He was gesturing at a crate, arguing about transport routes. My phone buzzed, Jimmy, my hacker buddy, texting, "Cops en route, 10-minute out. Found Clara's bank records. $50K deposit from a shell company tied to Hess. Nail M. 10 minutes. I could work with that. I needed evidence to seal this. Something the cops could use to bury Hess and Clara. A stack of documents on a nearby table caught my eye. Shipping manifests, forged HOA letters, and a list of targeted houses. Jackpot. I snapped photos with my phone, then tucked a few pages into my jacket for good measure. But Hess wasn't stupid. "Check the perimeter," he snapped, and the tall guy headed my way. I ducked behind a crate, holding my breath as his flashlight beam swept past. My Glock was ready, but a shootout in a confined space was a last resort. Instead, I grabbed a loose bowl from the floor and tossed it across the warehouse. It clattered against a metal beam, and the tall guy spun toward the sound, giving me a window to slip closer to the loading dock. That's when I saw her, Clara Vance, stepping out of the side office, her face pale but defiant. She was arguing with Hess, her voice low but heated. "You said this was clean, Victor. Callahan's not some retiree you can bully. He's SWAT." "Ex-SWAT," Hess sneered. "And you're in too deep to back out now. Clara, get the van ready." She hesitated, then nodded, heading for the loading dock. I couldn't let her slip away. She was the key to unraveling this. I crept along the wall, timing my move as Hess turned to bark another order. In one smooth motion, I grabbed Clara, pulling her into a shadowed corner with my hand over her mouth. She froze, eyes wide with panic. "Talk, and you might walk away from this," I whispered. "Why'd you sell out the neighborhood?" Her muffled reply was shaky but clear. I didn't have a choice. Hess, he had dirt on me, tax fraud from years ago. Said he'd ruin me unless I helped. I just gave him names, addresses, nothing big. Nothing big. I hissed. "They came for my guns, Clara. They're stealing from everyone." She sagged, guilt etching her face. "I'm sorry, Tom. I'll help you fix this. Just don't let him hurt me." I zip-tied her hands, not trusting her fully, but kept her close. The cops were minutes away, and I needed to keep Hess distracted. I stepped out from the shadows, my Glock raised but steady. "Hess!" I called, my voice echoing through the warehouse. Game's over. Drop the tough guy act and step away from the crates. The room went still. Hess's crew froze, hands twitching toward their waists. Hess himself turned slowly, his smirk faltering when he saw me. "Callahan, you're a persistent old dog, aren't you?" "Retired, not dead," I said. "Cops are on their way. You've got one chance to make this easy." He laughed, but was hollow. "You think you can take us all? You're one guy. One guy who spent 20 years hitting targets from 1,000 yards. I said, letting the weight of that sink in. "You want to test my aim?" His crew hesitated, and that was enough. Sirens wailed in the distance. Growing louder, Hess's smirk vanished. "Move," he shouted, grabbing for the laptop on the table. But I was ready. I fired a single shot, not at him, but at the crate beside him, splintering the wood and sending him diving for cover. His crew scattered, one bolting for the exit only to run straight into the arriving police. The next few minutes were chaos. Cops swarming, Hess and his crew cuffed. Clara spilling everything in a desperate bid for leniency. The warehouse was a goldmine of evidence. Stolen goods, forged documents, even a ledger linking Hess to a bigger network across the state. My photos and the papers I grabbed sealed the deal. As the cops hauled Hess away, he glared at me. "This isn't over, Callahan." I met his gaze, unflinching. "It is for you." Back in Willow Creek, the neighborhood buzzed with the news. The HOA was under investigation. Clara was cooperating with the DA, and the stolen goods were being returned to their owners. I sat on my porch, coffee in hand, watching the sunset. My shotguns were still in my safe, untouched, but I knew this wasn't the end. Hess had hinted at a bigger network, and my gut told me they'd come sniffing around again. For now, though, Willow Creek was safe, and I'd be ready when trouble came knocking again.